Network here at NC State. Thank you guys for joining us. Welcome to our first virtual speaker series of 2021. We are excited to welcome back everyone and would love for you guys to join us. Let us know where you're dialing in from. And I will introduce our three panelists here in just a minute. But one of the things that we would love to do is encourage your participation as well. We've got some great questions lined up for our panel members, but we'd love to hear from you guys as well. And Danielle, who I'll introduce here momentarily, has generously offered a $25 virtual gift card, a gift card for a virtual coffee with Danielle. And I can tell you just from having a chance to get to know Danielle over the last couple of weeks leading up to this event, it will be time very well spent having the chance to ask her any questions that you may have for an NC State alum with an engineering background who's worked for two very, very successful companies here in the Triangle, which we will learn more about here. So Danielle, thank you again for offering that to our attendees this afternoon. And again, if you have some questions, go ahead and start putting those in the chat. Here's what you can expect for the next hour. I will introduce our friends, and we're going to be talking all things about the good, the bad, and the ugly about working at a startup. We'll make sure that we don't just talk about the good, but also unpack some of those, maybe some of those lessons learned and some battle scars that folks have accrued over the last couple of years in their entrepreneurial journey. So we'll make sure that we share some of the bad and the ugly as well. I will spend a few minutes kind of walking through the backgrounds for all three of our panel members, learning about their experience and their time at NC State, and then learning a little bit more about their entrepreneurial journey to where they are today. And then we want to open it up for questions from our audience. So again, feel free to start putting those into the comments. Let us know where you're dialing in from, and we will go ahead and get rolling. So I will first kick it off with you again, Danielle. Thank you for your generous offer of your $25 gift card. Quick introduction, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do now, what you studied at NC State, and then just for fun, I'm going to throw a little bit of curveball for folks. So I guess Hersh and Quentin have the chance to think about this a little bit. I'm going to put you on the spot. So we were talking earlier about hopefully being able to have in-person events again at some point in the not too distant future. I'm the general manager at Audiovice. We're really passionate about music. So what is the first concert that you want to try to go see post-COVID? So that's going to be your question. So you can start off with, tell us a little about yourself, your time at NC State, what you're doing now, and what is the first concert you want to go see once COVID is hopefully over? Anyone? I can't hear you, so let me see real quick. No, I know we were able to hear you earlier. We'll give you just a couple seconds. We'll come right back to you.
Do you want to try? Can you hear me now?
There you go. There you go. We're good now. Awesome.
Okay, there we go. Technical difficulties even year into COVID. Go figure on that one. So I've got to answer the question first because I'm all excited about my answer. So Bare Naked Ladies, I'm a huge fan, and we love going to the concerts. They're just so much fun. But so Danielle McNeillie, and I went to NC State for bioprocessing engineering. Also got my business entrepreneurship, and I did the engineering entrepreneurs program where we got to go to Silicon Valley. I think it was one of the first couple of trips. Yeah. And it was amazing because I was going into all these companies, some of them that had been around forever, and then other companies that had just made it big incredibly quick. And there were NC State alums. Like I was able to go ahead and identify like all of these classes that I had taken with them are taken in the same buildings and whatnot over the years. So that was really cool. But so at NC State, I had a friend who somehow convinced me to start taking senior design through the engineering entrepreneurs program. And I just kind of kept taking it because I was learning more and meeting so many peers that were really cool, like from an entrepreneurial perspective. And then I got to see all these amazing speakers. And one of them was one of the companies I worked for, a channel advisor. So I got to see Aris, and channel advisor, the founder, Scott Wingo and Aris, they're known as the godfathers of e-commerce. And that was one of those inspirational things that I kept with me on my entrepreneurship journey. But after I graduated engineering school, I went and worked for Milliken Chemical, and that was a lot of fun, but I wanted to kind of get back to my entrepreneurial roots. So I would probably be considered, I love finding those people that have big ideas and enabling them. So I went to work with a company called Myco, which digitized handwriting. And then after that, I went and worked for Channel Advisor. And I was with Channel Advisor through their journey of going public, which was amazing. I actually was in Melbourne in Australia doing some enablement for our team down in Australia when I got to get up early in the morning and watch these leaders that I've been working with for years ring the bell on the stock exchange. Like, it was amazing. And then I hopped a plane back to the US, you know, and got back home 36 hours later. But so that was an amazing experience. And so that led me to kind of grow. And now I'm over at Red Hat working on I'm their director of enterprise CRM and CPQ, which is just a fancy way of saying that I work with the business to enable their processes and analytics through Salesforce and other type of cloud computing applications. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you so much, Danielle. So much to unpack. We're definitely going to come back to you. Thank you for sharing. Obviously, one of the big highs of your professional journey was, you know, being part of a company as they go public, which is, I'm sure, a lot of fun to be part of. So we'll come back to you with a lot of great questions. Hersh, I'll come to you next. Same question. Tell us, you know, obviously your time at NC State, what you're doing now, and your first concert that you want to go see in 2021, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. So Hersh Tapadia, I'm electrical engineer, 2009 grad from NC State. Kind of similar story as Danielle. I got recruited to go do the engineering entrepreneurs program instead of doing the regular program. I'd always kind of wanted to do something in as a startup, but I never really had put anything tangible to that until I got to that program. And it just totally changed my worldview, right? I said, oh, this is what high achieving people look like. This is what possibilities are. You don't have to go work at Cisco if you don't want to. Nothing wrong with Cisco, but you don't have to do that. And in that program, I met, some really great people. I met Jeremy Freeman, who's my current CTO. Him and I have been working together since 2008 continuously. It's pretty cool to have that relationship. Some of my lifelong friends, but I also got the opportunity to take the thing I had built in EP and spin it out, and went through kind of it wasn't really called an acqui-hire at the time, but I suppose you could call it an acqui-hire. And I got pulled into this startup that had been spinning out of Johnson & Johnson that one of our advisors was starting, and it was a supply chain security anti-counterfeiting startup, which dovetailed really nicely because the EP project was that company was a medical device. And then I went to Duke and got a graduate degree in biomedical engineering. And so I had this healthcare software kind of bent. And then I spent six years at the acquiring company. It was called Certirex, basically trying to teach people how software is built inside of healthcare companies, which is super fun because despite sharing the word development, drug development, software development aren't the same thing. And it's really hard to explain that. And so after kind of holding up the crap umbrella over my engineering team for 6 years, I said, it'd be really cool to actually kind of figure out what I want to do next. I really liked working with Jeremy. We went out, struck it on our own. We still had bills to pay, so we started a little consulting firm. And we had this idea that we would embed ourselves in engineering teams and we would figure out what their problems were. And whatever the problem that was the most exciting to us, we'd turn it into a startup and we'd go solve it. And so when we did that and started putting ourselves into this team, we just basically discovered a bunch of people doing what we had been doing previously, which is, trying to explain how software development works and why it doesn't work the way you hoped it would, and how to get it quantitative in the ways that all the other parts of the business are quantitative. And basically, eventually there will be a Danielle for the products we build, right? People enabling analytics around software development. And when we realized that, it kind of set off a chain of events that caused us to start Allstacks. We leveraged a bunch of help from the local community, did the NC IDEA process, eventually found ourselves in Techstars down in Austin, Texas, which is why my team is partially based down there, and raised a couple rounds of funding, and now we're scaling the business like crazy. We grew 15x last year through COVID, which was awesome, and hoping to grow even more this year. And so, you know, the thing that's really remarkable is I can like trace it all back to a single conversation I had with Steve Walsh in 2007 when I was in one of his classes, and he had this thing where he as one of the homework assignments was you had to sit down with him. Every student had to sit down with him for like 20 minutes and just talk. And he would like force you to learn how to like interact with other people, which is, you know, interesting for engineers, right? And that's when I discovered about the Engineering Entrepreneurs Program. And I also discovered that him and my mom were coworkers before I was born.
Oh, wow.
Back at IBM in the 80s. And so in that moment, that's kind of what set me off on this trajectory. So here we are.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Hersh, for the background. And again, lots to unpack there from both your experience in the EE program, which I think Monica has linked to for those who are curious to know more about that. Obviously, something that both you and Danielle have shared being involved in. And then also, you know, just the network of NC State. You mentioned your CTO and someone that you've been kind of part of this journey with since school. You know, you met being part of NC State. So we want to obviously learn a little bit more about that. Quentin, I will come to you next. Welcome back. Great to get to know you a little bit over our previous conversation. And I say welcome back because you maybe share with everyone a little bit about your exciting adventure that you've been on for the last few months. And then, you know, again, same questions. First concert you want to go see, tell us a little about your time at NC State and what it is that you were up to now. And of course, you're joining us on the West Coast, which, you know, again, we love to be in person with folks and, you know, meeting people face to face. But one of the benefits of this virtual series is that we're able to welcome folks like yourself who have roots at NC State, who are, you know, now not necessarily in the area. So again, hand it over to you. Would love to learn a little bit more about your background and your experience.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me. So I'm Quinten Farmer. I'm one of the founders of a company called Even. So we work with employers to give their employees more flexible on-demand access to their paycheck before payday. And just for like a little bit of context setting around where we are as a company, we're about 100 people. Pre-COVID, I actually would have said that we had offices in Raleigh and Oakland, but of course now our offices are all over the place, including myself living in Seattle. This year we'll serve about 1 million folks. So we work with companies like Walmart, Humana, and PayPal and others, you know, to serve their employees. And I'm particularly proud of the fact that we'll deliver over $1 billion in pay to people this year. And by our calculations, that'll save them about $100 million in overdraft fees, payday loan fees and the like. And so that's really the target for us. Can we give people more affordable alternatives, especially where the financial system, quite frankly, doesn't give them many alternatives. And so that's the company. That's a little bit where I am today, talking about how I ended up there. So I was a freshman at NC State in 2009. Now going into college, I thought I would maybe go to law school. That was sort of the dream, you know, for those that were maybe either in college or working in 2008, 2009. That suddenly did not look like a great time to be preparing to go to law school, right? And so I was sort of poking around for alternatives, and I actually found you know, the Entrepreneurship Initiative and actually an early version of the Entrepreneurship Garage at State, you know, sort of a little bit of a informal place to hang out with people who were interested in startups. And it's a little bit hard to believe, but at the time that was not at all an interesting area to spend time, right? There really wasn't much energy yet around tech startups as a place to invest your career. But through that early exposure and some of the great folks we met through that initial class, I actually ended up making a decision to drop out and move to New York and work for first an investor, and then a couple of that investor's portfolio companies. And then ultimately that person actually became the first person to commit to invest in Even. So that was a guy named David Tisch, who's an angel investor in New York. And so, very fortunate to have had the initial exposure at NC State, but then also, I think very fortunate that the Raleigh community pre-COVID was so strong. I mean, this was an easy decision for us a couple of years into building Even to open an office in Raleigh, even though we started the company in Oakland, because of some of the things, we've already heard about here, right? Strong community around NC State and just around the region, which made it a great place to help us grow the team. So, and then I was thinking about the concert question, and I've got to say, right before COVID, one of our first employees in Oakland is in a what I would probably call a punk band, but I'm sure there's a way cooler name for it, like genre than I know. And we went to their concert, which was in a like a squat house in West Oakland, like 15 people. And I've never felt more like a dad in my entire life. But I'm really excited to go back to one of Vincent's shows post-COVID, because that was a hell of a lot of fun.
Awesome. We've been watching a lot of concerts on YouTube and those kind of things, and so my kids have been really excited to try to go see Ed Sheeran one day. So my wife and I were able to see him a couple of years ago, but that's like the one person that they want to see. So hopefully, when we have the opportunity to, we'll be able to take our kids to that concert, which is a lot of fun. One-man band. It's pretty impressive, all the stuff that he can do. So. Cool. I will come back to something I think both Hersh and Danielle mentioned was their experience as part of the EE program. So maybe Hersh or Danielle, I'll throw it to both of you guys. Can you just maybe, for those who don't know about that program, maybe give us the 60-second overview of what they would expect if that's something that they wanted to consider. And then I'd love to hear from both of you guys, what are maybe one or two of the big takeaways that you're experiencing from that experience as being part of that program.
So how I got sold going into EP, especially as a freshman or sophomore, was hey Danielle, so you're gonna actually learn why you build things, like the whole, what are you looking from a business outcome, total addressable market, how you decide on your requirements, your design, platform, everything else. And so that was all the speakers. So essentially we were going into classes, and once a week we would see an entrepreneur would come and talk about their journey. And then we would have other classes that kind of guided us through the senior design process. And as a requirement with the senior design process, when I was going to school for the engineering entrepreneurship program, is we also had to write a business plan. So we had to understand all these different parts. And we even submitted it to a couple of investors to go ahead and get their feedback, which was amazing. You kind of figured out very early on in your education, why people care about certain things. And it was really cool.
That's nice. Yeah. So as an engineer, you're learning how to build things, but as part of this program is, well, how does that fit in as part of the bigger picture, right? And what's the purpose behind it, which is great. Thanks for sharing that. Hersh, your thoughts, or maybe your summary of what folks could expect from that type of a program?
Yeah, I think there's a couple key things. Jeremy, who's in the program with me, him and I were talking about this conversation during one of those lectures where the sales leader came in to talk about the practice of selling software, and they were talking about a conversation that he was having with one of his engineering leaders, and he said, they're arguing about the value of what they do and blah blah blah, and basically it came down to engineering leaders, or one of them said, well, if you don't, how do you do that? If you don't sell, you won't get to eat, right? And that's really scary and risky and all that. And the sales leader turns to the engineering leader and says, yeah, but if I don't sell, you don't get to eat either. And so, it kind of brought together this notion that there's no vacuum, right? When we're taught engineering, we're taught it in a vacuum. We're taught that here's a set of parameters, build a widget and give it to somebody else, and now it's not your problem. And when you do that, you end up with crappy products and things that nobody cares about, and you feel like a cog in the machine. And that was combined with an experience I had when I did an internship at IBM, where IBM had this internal product called Blue Pages, and Blue Pages was like LinkedIn. And it had this thing where you could see the hierarchy from yourself to the CEO, right? All the levels of management. And so I was software engineer 1, And I scrolled for 2 pages of just me, next manager, next manager, next manager, and eventually got to the CEO. And I remember sitting there thinking like, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know why it matters. I don't know if I don't do this work, like what's the impact of it, right? I could sit here for months and nobody would notice, right? And that's just not a great feeling to have about starting off your engineering career. And then I got exposed to this other, like, create your future rather than have your future created for you. And it was just totally life-changing. So like, the mechanics of the EEP program, I think, have changed several times since I went through it. I think my experience was really similar to Danielle's, but I think it's not quite the same anymore. But it doesn't really matter. What matters is learning that the person who can communicate is the person that's shipping value. Whatever the modality of how you ship value is, it doesn't matter. It's about how you communicate that value. And that's something that was really like hammered into us in EEP in ways that were totally disjoint or orthogonal from what we learned in the rest of our engineering curriculum.
Yeah, that's great. As you were giving that illustration of what your first few days at a big company were like, I'm just naturally thinking back to anybody who's seen Silicon Valley on HBO, right, and being part of, like, I think it's Huli is the organization they work for, and just like slamming their head up against the desk because they're just sort of a cog in a wheel and don't understand the bigger picture. So thank you for that, guys. Quentin, coming to you, we're going to transition a little bit to the good, the bad, and the ugly of being part of a startup. I know in our conversation you had a couple of good examples of maybe what's a war story or maybe a scar that you've accumulated along the way. You can share some of the great things that have happened too, but what's one thing that you could share with our folks today about a really cool war story or something like that maybe they wouldn't expect to normally hear about your experience as being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, fun. We can start with the scary stuff. That sounds great.
Get out of the way, right?
I'm going to watch the attendee list on the right side drop down. So I think for a little bit of context here, at Even, we sell to big companies to then reach their employees, right? And so, in fact, the first company that we ever sold to, which I highly do not recommend, was Walmart, right? So we were a 6-person company and we sold to 1.4 million people to start things off.
Right.
And, also, at the time I started the company, I was 25, right? So it's not like I'd done this before. I didn't know what was required to work with a great company, like Walmart. And we were probably, 6 weeks away from signing the contract and starting our initial pilot. And on a Friday afternoon call, one of our contacts there just kind of casually dropped, oh, hey, by the way, the information security auditors, they're going to be by next week. I think their flight's booked for Tuesday. And I remember kind of looking with my CTO across the table, like, oh crap, what is that? Like, those are a bunch of words that sounded scary, right? And so we asked some questions and we got some guidance from our contacts. But basically, what we were looking at was a spreadsheet with something like 300 different rows in it. That were basically, hey, here are all the components of an information security audit. Now, anyone that's on this call that has talked to or has worked with a big company, this seems totally reasonable to you, right? But like, to me, this sounded insane and very scary. And so we basically called in some of our investors and advisors, but also just essentially worked for like the next 4 days straight to develop an information security program, right? From the ground up. And what's funny is, like, I think a lot of times when you see like a documentary or even like a movie about an early startup, those like crunch time like moments can actually seem kind of exciting. Like, oh, you're drinking a lot of Red Bull and you're with your friends and you're working. But like, this actually sucked, right? Like, we were like documenting security controls for like 4 days straight with the hope of getting this contract done. Now, ultimately, we did it and we passed the audit and we ended up getting the contract, right? Or else I probably wouldn't be here talking with you, at least not about Even. But I just can't emphasize enough, like, you're going to have those crunch moments, and some of them are going to be fun and some of them are going to have cool breakthroughs. Like, working at a startup also is like doing a lot of like spinning up the infrastructure of a real company from scratch. Right. And most of that sucks, right? Most of it's not fun. And so that would probably be one of the battle scars, I guess.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. There's working at a startup, there's no job too big and no job too small, right? Whether you're pitching to an investor or you're, having to do the grunt work because there's no one else to look at to do it, right? It all sort of falls on your shoulders.
And there's one part in the audit. I mean, just to give an example, we've got these 2 very serious guys in from Walmart. They're talking to us, and they get to a point on the checklist, and they say, well, excuse me, how big is your information security and compliance team? And I sort of looked around the room and I was like, well, I'm like 6'4", 220. I don't know what else you want me to say.
Yeah.
They didn't laugh at that, but my co-founder did. So yeah, no job too small. You kind of got to take it all on by yourself in the earliest days.
That's a great response. Danielle, coming to you, same question. What's maybe a lesson learned or battle scar that you can share that you've accumulated along your journey from your time as being part of either an entrepreneur or in your entrepreneurial roles with the companies that you've worked with?
So I think being an entrepreneur is being a jack of many trades. And so you learn because you want to so much about so many things. And so you want to help. That's one of my challenges, is that I want to get involved. I want to help solve problems. I want to help brainstorm. I want to help get something started. And so at some point you get to that you don't have any more to give, or the quality at which you're giving is not going to be there. And so that's probably the hardest thing that I've had to overcome and build muscle to say, okay, wait a second. What I need to do is go ahead and start enabling people around me with those skill sets so they can do those things too. So I can kind of help out with these other areas that someone doesn't have experience on, and make sure we're all able to do those things. But that's always the hard part, is like you get so excited about figuring these things out with the team, and you can't just be everywhere all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. Spread thin for sure. I'm sure it's something you experienced, especially being part of a smaller team in a smaller company. I'm gonna weave in an audience question that this one was specifically for you, Danielle, and then Hersh, I want to come back to you and hear some of your war stories as well. They asked, Danielle, what about your education in engineering and entrepreneurship helped you the most in navigating your career in your leadership role at Red Hat?
Oh, great question. So having the both technical side and the business side, or understanding why you're doing something, is what I would say most leaders at Red Hat and so many other companies, that's the unicorn. Because there's very few people that can go ahead and get in front of an audience, understand where they're coming from, and adjust the story or the communication to help them understand and to get behind you with a vision or an idea. So when you find those folks, like it was coming out of the engineering entrepreneurship program. So I graduated in 2005, and it was not, when other people were graduating in 99 and 2000, people were getting like signing bonuses left and right. And what made the difference when I went on interviews, I was one of the few people in my class that graduated with a job. In fact, I went on the interview and I left the job with an offer, because they don't get a lot of people that have both the technical side, the vision, the business stuff. And that's what the entrepreneurship programs at State did for me. I could present, I could talk, I could communicate, and I got put in at like channel advisor. I was helping out with acquisitions because I could do that. Like I wasn't afraid to ask questions. I wasn't afraid to like dive in and figure things out. That's the thing that makes a lot of these companies be really excited for someone with our background from the panel side. So that's a great question.
Yeah, and quick follow-up. One of the things that you mentioned in our earlier conversation was that one of the reasons why you were drawn to entrepreneurship is because you feel like you have a very keen sense of enabling founders, or maybe sort of that visionary, and help them sort of turn that into or flesh out what that actually looks like in the marketplace. Maybe tell us a little bit more about that.
So yeah, that's one of those, over the years, taking entrepreneurship and participating in all these different types of conferences and initiatives and training. And I've never wanted to be the person, I'm not the idea person in there. But when someone is able to kind of give the vision, I love going ahead and figuring it out. so years ago, one of the things that a sales leader over at Channel Advisor needed is, hey, we want to go ahead and improve the customer experience. So if we're requesting a contract with our pricing in these different products, and it takes 7 days to get something into a customer's hands, and we're talking software as a service. So software as a service, like, the expectations now out there are you move fast, you move quick, you make good decisions, and then you start implementing and getting value. And so I was able to kind of think through, okay, all the different parts of the vision, not only the technical part, the business part, the enablement of the users of that. And those are the fun things. Like, I thrive on kind of pulling all those things together, talking to people, getting their point of view, and then helping make that realized.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I think with any startup team, there's always sort of the visionary, and there's a very complementary skill set, which is more of the integrator, right? How do we actually help make this vision materialize, right? And you can't have one without the other. There's a very obviously symbiotic relationship there. Hersh, coming back to you on the ugly, the bad, the battle scars that you can share with our attendees this afternoon from your journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I think Quinten had a really great story that I've experienced in similar ways as well, but there's a little bit of a different side of this, right? There's the operational side. There's a lot of hard things on the operational side, but there's like a physical and mental health side, and the impact of it on your relationships with other people and your friends and family and yourself. And I think the thing that when you're really young and you're like in your early 20s, you're coming out and you're doing this thing, like, there's this tendency that like you don't quite know what you're doing, so you're just like, I got to be busy all the time, right? And so you're just always at it, right? You're at it, you're there working 12-15 hour days, you work all weekend, you're working all the time, and it takes a huge toll on not just your mental health, but like, what is the thing that helps us actually be successful? It's our social safety nets that allow us to lean on these people that help us, support us, prop us up, their counsel, they help us work through these things. And it's not always even explicit. It's like, if I can spend a Saturday with a friend, helping them, fix something in their house, or like going for a walk or something, you're processing things in the background, right? And so the first thing we do when we get into a startup is we throw all that away. And you do that, and then you wake up, and if you're really lucky and you're really successful and you get through all this stuff, you wake up 5-10 years later and you realize like you've lost all your sanity and all your mental health and your family and your relationships and your social connections, because you prioritized the short-term busyness over the long-term actual value for why you're doing the work you're doing. So, that's the classic battle scar that I think every single young entrepreneur goes through. And it almost doesn't matter if it's a startup or if it's like you're working really hard in a corporate gig and you're trying to like ascend the ladder, you're in a consulting firm, it's up and out culture, like you're going to do the same thing, right? And so the real lesson is something I learned really early on when I talked to a founder for a startup I worked at. And he was like, look, at the end of the day, if I emerge from this thing with my family and my health, I'm going to be successful, because everything else doesn't really matter. But if I come out the other side and I have no family, no health, but a pile of money, like, what was it for, right? And those are the two extreme ends, and there's a lot you can do in the middle. Mm-hmm. And so like the big lesson from that battle scar is, in the midst of all this operational activity, you actually benefit a lot if you can, like, say, shut down Friday night and don't work again until Sunday morning. You're still working in the back of your head, and you don't even realize it, but it's actually helping you be more successful in the long run. All the folks that came through the EP and all my early career that kept talking to me about like, oh, this is a marathon, not a sprint, marathon, not a sprint. And I was just like, what are you talking about? I don't understand, right? Like, I get it now, right? It took me a few years to figure it out, but the earlier you can figure it out, I think the better off you'll be in your whole career.
And Hersh, so that point is so important. So one of my funny EEP stories was after, my friend convinced me to take EEP and I found so much value of it. The guy I was dating at the time, I somehow convinced him and his friends to take EEP too. And from a social perspective, that, over time, having those people that can go ahead and support you, hey, this weekend I need to go ahead and work on this, or I'm researching that, or hey, I need to go ahead and practice this presentation and see where I'm tripping up, or I've been looking at this until 2 a.m. It's 6 o'clock. You've had coffee, I haven't. Can you make sure that this actually makes sense? Is, surrounding you with those people that can help bring you up, support you, and then also get a lot of joy out of kind of that type of relationship. And then making sure to give it back to them when you can, knowing how much that they go ahead and support you is such an important thing for long-term success and balanced happiness.
Yeah, absolutely. Great points from both of you guys. Thanks for sharing that. And I think, Hersh, you mentioned, we spend, in a startup environment, you spend most of your waking hours, right, with your team. And so it's incredibly important to have, those relationships to lean on as you go through this journey, and, all the highs and the lows that you experience as part of the entrepreneurial journey. But it can be really painful, right? Especially if you lose some of those key team members, throughout the process. I don't know if you have anything to add, or if that's just maybe the takeaway from that as well, is, what that feels like as maybe one of the uglier down negative parts about being part of a startup, right? While we're still on that part.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at your company and you personify your company, right? You're not looking at your logo and saying, oh, this is what my company is. You're looking at the set of people that make up that company, and the amount of time you spend with them, the fact you spend more time with them than your family. And each of those personalities, especially in the early days, dramatically imprints on the culture of the company. So the thing you have to remember, you have to kind of step back and say, everyone in our company is on their own journey, and we happen to be walking together right now. And so then if you can do that, it's not going to hurt less when those people move on, but at least you can come to peace with it, because you realize that their imprint on the culture of the company and the impact that they had with you is still going to stay with you and with the company over the long period of time. But it sucks, right? You have all these people and they're part of this, and you were all scrapping together in a closet for a while, and you get to really know each other in incredibly intimate ways, and then they get another opportunity, or something changes in their life, or some externality happens, and you go to work the next day and they're not there anymore, right? It's not that they're gone, right? They're not dead usually, but it's just that day-to-day interaction fades, right? And so I think some of those, when I think about things like accelerators and co-working spaces and things like that, I don't see as much value the co-working spaces. It's not about the oh, we have all these resources and things like that. Those rarely bear out value. What it is you build a bigger community than you otherwise could have, because your company is 2 or 3 people, but then there's 4 other 2 or 3 people communities. Then you hit it off, and all of a sudden it feels like you have a 20-30 person company that you can socialize with and build those relationships with, that are a little broader than what you could do in your little closet. That's the value of having that kind of network around you, and leaning into that. Things like this, the Alumni Entrepreneurship Network, all that. That's the kind of stuff you need to get through the hard parts of doing a startup.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I've learned over my years is, one of the brutal realities is, some of the same team members that maybe helped you come up with a product, or through the ideation phase, maybe some of those folks aren't the right team to help you get to a market validation phase, right? And just because you get to a market validation point in your journey, doesn't mean that's necessarily the right team that is, or the right folks on the bus to help you, scale and grow the business into something much larger, like a sustainable enterprise, right? And that's just the reality. And One of the things that I'm very appreciative of, and some of my previous roles, I still have a monthly now virtual lunch, with folks from my time at bandwidth.com and other places, and so it's great to kind of reconnect with those folks. And it's been 5-6 years now in some instances, but those relationships are lifelong, and so that's something that's great perspective to keep as well. Wanted to obviously to spend some time on the bad and the ugly, because that's just the reality of what the life of an entrepreneur is. And so hopefully it didn't cast too much of a negative spirit on this conversation, but want to maybe transition now to some of the big wins or some of the things that you kind of hang your hat on as an entrepreneur. So Quentin, I'll come back to you. What is it about entrepreneurship that I guess attracted you in the first place? And then the follow-up question is, can you share with our attendees this evening, maybe one or two of the maybe monumental moments, or one or two of the things that you're most proud of during your time?
Yeah, so I think the attraction question, I think each of us has actually touched on it at some point in each of the stories we've told so far, right? So I think when you're a generally pretty nerdy, high school student going into college or whatever, at least for me, and I've heard this reflected from almost everyone I've talked to, you're often just really hungry for a group of people who are as curious and hardworking as you are, right? And you're kind of seeking that when you're coming into college, right? And so for me, EI and generally the very nascent entrepreneurship community that existed at State at the time sort of represented that, right? Like honestly, a bunch of curious nerds was kind of what we were. And I think that's probably still the case. And so it was almost like incidental to some extent that technology and entrepreneurship was the wrapper, right? The real core of it was, hey, there's a bunch of people who think like me and are really curious about the world. And I think that's actually proven to be true at each of the career stops I've made, right? All the way up to and including even like the fact that I now get to work every day with a bunch of people who are really curious about the world, generally think that the financial system could work a lot better for people, and want to achieve that change in a way that basically gives more power and control back to the folks we serve. Like that's pretty special, right? You're talking about the org chart at IBM, right? Like I'm guessing when you were scrolling up that list, you didn't necessarily feel a lot of alignment with everyone in that org chart, right? I feel super lucky that I get that every single day. And so that's the attraction and what really brings me brought me into this world, I should say. If I were to tie that theme or that concept back to a big win, one of the stories that still sticks with me a couple years later, I talked about the early stages of signing the Walmart contract, but we signed that and we launched, and the expectation was that in the first year, this was their expectation. They said, hey, if we serve 50,000 Walmart employees in the first year, that's going to be a huge win. That's going to be success, right? And I think we ended up hitting that number in about 6 weeks of launch. And launch, by the way, happened it started, I should say, 5 days before Christmas. And so I just have this really specific memory of I was in New York City. I had wrapped up meetings. I was hypothetically actually on my way to meet my now wife to look at engagement rings. So it was a busy day, overall. But I was on the phone with our support team, and they were like, "Hey, this is phenomenal." It was like 4 people on the team at the time. This is phenomenal. Everything's going so well, but holy crap, we're melting down, right? Like if we don't get more people to help, like this Christmas is going to be and next year is going to be a mess. And so I hung up on the phone with them and immediately started calling folks, including actually an NC State alumni, Mitch Moore, a guy who actually ended up helping us start our Raleigh office. And the conversation was basically like, hey, I know you share my values. I know you share, sort of the curiosities that I have. Can you come help us figure this thing out? Because we've got something on our hands here. Let's go do it. And I had 4 or 5 conversations while walking to the engagement ring place in New York. And I think four of those people that I talked to are now leaders on the team at Even, right? Are now people who have joined us and have grown so much the last couple of years. And so, going back to, what is a win? What felt really good? In that moment, it felt amazing, right? We had been struggling for 3 years to get to this place where we had something really taking off. But it's also something that I'm super proud to look back on a couple of years later, because those folks are now a core part of this 100-person company, right? Not a 10, 15-person company. And that's still really small by, a lot of big company standards, but it's still something to be proud of, which is pretty cool. So yeah, that's what I go to for a win.
Yeah, that's great. Especially when you spend so much time as an entrepreneur, sort of birthing this child, if you will, not to minimize the folks who've actually gone through that experience, but metaphorically speaking, and then to see that it actually has market validation and it's accepted in the marketplace, especially at the rate that you guys saw with your growth. Quick follow-up question, Quentin, for you. During our earlier conversation, which I thought was very much kind of a moment of like a naked truth, if you will, when you talked about recognizing your own limitations, and you just sort of shared one example of that with reaching out to someone at NC State who could help you maybe scale some of your support team. But maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, especially coming from the president of a 100-person company, the importance of maybe recognizing your limitations and how you apply that in your professional path.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I guess this is like a cliche, right? But I think I've probably fired myself from at least 3 jobs and hope to fire myself from a few more at Even, right? Like right now, I'm a converted engineer running our sales team, right? Like that's a terrible idea. I can tell you that right now. And like in actuality, it's tough, right? And so, I think a lot of what you end up doing, and it's important in your own psychology to treat this as a win, not as a loss, is to say, hey, look, here's the thing that the company needs from this seat right now. And I'm in that seat, but I'm actually not the best person to deliver that, right? I think, Danielle, you alluded to some of this earlier in some of what you were talking about, right? How your roles have changed and how you've kind of jumped in where help is needed. And so, yeah, I mean, I think this is a constant effort to say, okay, what does the company need? What can I bring to the table? And how can I hire to replace myself and make us even better?
Yeah, that's great perspective. Danielle, coming back to you on some of the big wins. I know you shared a little bit about your time at Channel Advisor, but maybe some of the other big wins from your journey as an entrepreneur that you want to share with our folks. And really quickly, before I hand it back over to you, if you've got a question, go ahead and put it in the comments below. This will probably be the final question that I ask, and I want to make sure we've got plenty of other questions that we can get to. If you guys have a question for either Hersh, Danielle, or Quentin, please go ahead and put that in the chat, and we'll make sure we get to those before we wrap up here in the next little less than 15 minutes. So Danielle, coming back to you on big wins, the good of being an entrepreneur.
So one of my favorite things that has occurred to me over the past couple of years is my brother finally asked me for advice. And the reason why I'm saying that is that over the years, all of these experiences working with the sales team to kind of figure out how you build pipeline and close deals faster, and how do you price based on the customer market? How do you work with marketing to go ahead and get better engagement and reporting on different content, so that way you're putting your money where it's most valuable? Contracting, compliance, like all of these stories over the years that I've been able to tell. And there were more people listening than I really realized. And a few years ago, my brother, who has a medical background and a bunch of patents, he decided to start his own company. So he was the visionary that I like to enable. And I remember last year getting the phone call where he's asking for my advice on marketing and sales, and then people management, and how to engage people and build them up and establish goals, all those different things together. Like that, it might sound small, but it was a big deal to me, because I had this person who's incredibly smart, way smarter than I'll ever be, that was asking for my advice because he's building his own company and trying to figure all this stuff out. And it's stuff that I've been doing for years in different lenses and different perspectives. And he wanted to go ahead and like brainstorm ideas with me. And so those are the moments, working with other people, building them up, helping them with their career, that feels incredible, because you can share all those experiences and know that they're going to benefit from those hard moments and the good moments that you've had.
Yeah, that's great. Tom, I think in the comments said, brothers normally ask for favors, not advice. So take that as a big compliment.
Oh, huge.
Hersh.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the biggest wins are when you feel like you've achieved like some baseline threshold that, you previously, you broke through some ceiling that you previously couldn't access, right? So it's like we signed our first customer. Like that's huge, right? You're just, oh my God, I can't believe someone's paying us for this, right? We never thought we'd be able to do that. And then you sign your second customer, third customer. Okay, that's cool. Now you sign your first customer that's like a big company, right? And it just totally feels different. Like Quentin said, like we went through our InfoSec stuff and we got our SOC 2 Type 2 certification. We got we got to go and deploy with a large customer in the cloud without having to do any like special work, nothing one-off for them. And it was just like seamless. And we're just like, oh my God, I can't believe this ever happened, right? You sign your first 6-figure deal, get your first 7-figure deal, right? Like it's all about like orders of magnitude of attainment that are the big wins. Because what's really magical is when you realize something that 3 weeks ago, you didn't even think was in the wheelhouse. And that's what's like really magical about startups, is that it just goes so fast, right? One day we had 5 people, next day we had 15 people. We literally had 10 people brought into the company in 8 weeks when we closed our last round of funding. And then a few months after that, we signed our biggest deal we'd ever had. And then we find out that this biggest deal next month is going to double in size.
Right.
And they came to us and we said, hey, we got to work on the renewal of this contract. And come like, yeah, cool. Like we have 100 seats right now, actually triple in size. We have 100 seats right now. We're going to go to 300 seats, that like minimum, or it might be bigger than that. We'll let you know in a couple of weeks. And you're just sitting there and just like, oh my God, right? Like 12 months ago, we were barely able to get to this point. Now look at where we are. And what's really cool about it is it can be hours or days. Like the cycle time of this stuff inside of a startup is so short, and you learn so much. And then the next thing you know, all of a sudden you're the expert on this topic that didn't exist 6 weeks ago. It happens so often, it's hard to pick out like, this is my big win, but it's the momentum, it's the pace of that happening over and over and over. That's what's really the win. And it's very addicting. And once you get it, you're kind of ruined for anything else.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Just keep going back down that journey. So I'm going to do a couple of rapid fire questions here in our last 7 or 8 minutes to the panel. First question is from Caroline Cashwell. I believe I got that right. She said, did you have an aha moment that gave you more confidence in offering long-term or unique value? Open to the panel.
I can say for us that one of the big moments was when we first started the company. We reached out to 50 people cold, and every single one of those people sat down, had a coffee with us. Every single one of those people said, yeah, I have this problem. And every single one of these people said, yeah, I'd pay for a solution. We didn't even know what we had yet. We just knew that there was something there. And to get 50 for 50 for 50 was in a row was like amazing.
Yeah, that's a great comment. And just the importance of what you call it voice of customer research, right? Getting out there and actually socializing your idea and not getting stuck kind of inside the 4 walls of, working with a small team, but socializing the idea, and, you'll find you're getting validation or you're not. So that's a great way to do it, is take advantage of those, virtual coffees like Danielle has offered, or hopefully real in-person coffees here at some point in the not too distant future. But it's incredibly, incredibly important to get the voice of customer, and you'll learn so much through that process. So anything else to add, Danielle, Quentin?
So I had a great aha story. I was participating in a sales QBR, and
what's a QBR for those who don't know?
Quarterly business review. And so I was the last presenter, and as you can imagine, everybody was running over. So I was literally standing between my audience and beers and dinner. Right. And so that's a really hard place to be. And I said, you know what, guys, I just want to give you a 10-minute pitch or a vision of how we can go ahead and automate quotes all the way to the cash process for our sales team. And just talked through the process, big picture. And people were leaning forward, paying attention, not checking their watch, their iPhone, everything else. And instead of just giving me 10 minutes, they gave me 20 when I knew that they knew a few blocks away was their beers and an incredible dinner. And the CEO, jokingly, of course, walked up to me and said, "How much do you need? I'll write you a check right here." And so that's the aha moment of like, oh my gosh, this is all coming together.
That's great. That's great. Quentin, anything to add?
I think with even the question of unique or differentiated value, actually for us is a lot more about identifying the right constraints. So, for example, something we picked really early on was we operate via a membership model, not via transaction fees or interest, right? So that actually didn't tell us anything about what our product should do or how it should be designed, right? But it did kind of steer us away from looking like a lot of other financial services companies. And so I'd say, if you've got a lot of white space, you're trying to figure out the way you want to operate, picking constraints rather than picking what to do can be helpful in narrowing down how your team works and what you achieve.
That's great. We got just a couple minutes, maybe time for one more. This is from Jeremy Freeman. How do you take risk on an idea when you have no idea how you're going to make rent?
I mean, maybe as a starting point, hugely life dependent, right? Like your ability and in fact, the willingness you should have to take that sort of risk, maybe while still in college or fresh out of college, totally different than, later in life with the family or other obligations. So setting aside that starting point, I think there's almost always something you can do to move yourself a little bit closer to feeling that you have some validation that there's something here without actually taking the full plunge, right? So I think there's obviously plenty of narratives around, screw it, quit your job or screw it and drop out of college. I did that one, maybe not always the best idea. But there's almost always something you can do over the weekend or at night to say, hey, how can I make myself feel more confident that there's something here? Like having 50 coffees with people you reach out to who work in the problem space you're trying to work on, right? So I'd say maybe start there before even thinking about the question of rent and how you're going to make ends meet.
Anything else to add, Hersh or Danielle?
I think that was spot on. Making progress is everything. Right? Progress doesn't have to be a step function if you can't make rent, but you can always incrementally go a little bit farther.
Yeah. Great book I read. I was trying to find the title, the actual author, because I can't remember. It was a book. It was called How to Find Your Dream Job Without Quitting Your Day Job. I think was what it was called. But it was, a lot of side hustle. Obviously depends on the season of life that you're in and your risk profile and all of those other things. So there's no universal answer, but he gives a lot of great tips on how to pursue that dream job without necessarily quitting your day job until you're ready to do so. I think that's just about to wrap us up. I will, Danielle, who is going to be the lucky winner of your very generous $25 gift card and virtual coffee?
So I'd love to go ahead and take Caroline out for virtual coffee. I love aha moments. We all have them. So that feels like the right winner there.
Awesome. Fantastic. So Caroline, if you would maybe send Danielle a direct message here on the Zoom so she can get your contact information and we can get you set up there. Or I'm sure we probably can grab it from the registration. And thank you so much to Danielle, to Hersh, to Quentin for taking some time out of your evening. Thank you to everyone who joined us this evening. We can't wait to have you back. If we could put up the slide for our next virtual series that we'll be having in the month of March, we will bring that up. Thank you, Monica. So please go ahead and register. I'm sure we'll get the registration link out to you guys now. We've got a couple of additional great panel members joining us next month, where we'll be talking about how to use analytics to make business decisions. So something that is obviously very, very relevant in our world today, how to use analytics to make business decisions. Go ahead and register now. We will make sure that you guys all have the link to get set up for next month. Thanks again to everyone who joined us this evening. I heard there's about a minute left in the NC State basketball game, so maybe you got enough time to go check the very last of the game there. So again, thank you to our panel members. Thank you to everyone at NC State who helped put this on. Monica, Nikki, Ellen, so many other folks behind the scenes for helping us out, for having a great event. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you again next month.
Thanks all. See ya.